Hello. Today is my birthday, August 30th, 2019, 69 years old. I got up in time to see the dawn of my 70s. There was a nice sunrise here at Ocean Park, and I quietly left the bedroom and took my guitar down and worked on a song that I'm composing for my mother, that I was able to get the final verse of it there sitting on the bench watching the sunrise. So birthday started out very strong and then was full of all kinds of shenanigans by my 3 grandsons and my 2 daughters, and we had a nice lobster meal that my son-in-law made lobster rolls from scratch after driving up from his job in Boston. So it's been a really wonderful day. And I have a good show for you this week. It features a conversation that I had with a longtime friend, Bryan Person, who is now in London. So we get a little taste of London in this conversation. He and I have been sharing observations about technology for, 10, 15 years. Before, I think the first time I talked to him was before even the Kindle Chronicles. So good to have him on the show. And then we've got some other things I'll be telling you about as well, but we'll be wrapping it up fairly early so that I'm not keeping Darlene up on a night that she did all kinds of nice things for me, including creating a wonderful banner that was waiting for me when I got home from my meeting this morning. Happy birthday, Grandpa, emblazoned across the cottage front deck, painted and worked on by my grandsons, Ryan and Jake, and their mother, my daughter, Rue. Here's the teaser for my conversation with Bryan.
Again, depending on what I want to do and the type of book, that determines whether I go print version or read it on the Kindle.
There's a news item I want to talk to you about, and it appeared in the Washington Post, which sometimes we hear is the Amazon Washington Post, as if it's designed simply to promote Amazon's interests. I think anybody that reads the Post and follows Amazon knows that that's a pretty far-fetched view of the Post, and this article would fall into that category. It's titled, "Aggressive Amazon Tactic Pushes You to Consider Its Own Brand Before You Click Buy." The reporter is Jay Green. And there's a video of it that summarizes the article pretty effectively. I'll play you the audio of that and then tell you what I think about it.
Amazon is testing a feature that aims to siphon shoppers towards its products just as they are about to buy a rival item. I'm Washington Post reporter Jay Green. Amazon has rolled out a feature in which the e-commerce giant is pitching its own private label brands in an aggressive and new way. The pitch appears in the spot on product pages that's just above the button where shoppers click to add items to their shopping carts. The shoppers, who Amazon has put into this experiment, can see the pitch on a variety of products, everything from cosmetics to diapers to coffee pods. It's a move that illustrates how the company can use its powerful position running the world's largest online marketplace to advantage its products. Let me show you how it works. Say you want to buy a box of Glad Tall Drawstring trash bags. Type that into the search bar on Amazon's website. The first row of listings is Sponsored by Glad. Let's skip down to the next row. There, the first 3 listings are also sponsored. So let's click on this one, Glad Tall Kitchen Drawstring Trash Bags. These ones have Febreze freshness. Sounds good. The top part of the column on the right side of the page is called the Buy Box. That's where Amazon often puts the best prices it and third-party merchants on its site offer. It may be the most valuable piece of digital real estate on the site. Experts say about 90% of Amazon shoppers select the Buy Box option rather than scroll to choose an offer from other sellers on Amazon. Just above the Buy Box on the Glad trash bag page, though, Amazon has added a new box. It has the heading, Similar Item to Consider. In this case, Amazon is encouraging shoppers to buy trash bags from Amazon's private label brand, Solomo.
Well, that gives you an idea for what the clip is about and what the article is about. I've got a couple of perspectives on this. One is as a former journalist, and one is as an Amazon, a quite satisfied Amazon customer. I think as a journalist, I notice that there's some pretty loaded language in this article, and then loaded language tends to get picked up in the headline, and I've worked on a copy desk, and I know that's the job of a headline writer is to catch the reader's attention with some snappy language. So when this is described as aggressive Amazon tactic pushes you to consider its own brand before you click buy, aggressive, and that word is in the story at least once, I think. So I find the story kind of slanted, if it's not just talking about a feature that they've discovered on the website. And in the case of the video, I find the music kind of ominous. This is a piece that has a definite perspective. They got some comments from the company. I don't think that they really were weighted that heavily compared to the overall approach of the article. So anyway, kind of a hit piece, kind of a pretty negative piece, and the kind of piece that if the person who owns the Washington Post had any influence at all on the Post news coverage and had any motivation to try to improve Amazon's public posture in the newspaper, you think, yeah, this is a story that might never have seen the light of day. I am completely convinced that Jeff Bezos would rather run down Broadway naked than find himself interfering in the newsroom with a story about anything, especially something about Amazon. So that just doesn't happen. As a customer of Amazon, I just find this a baffling story, because when I see something that if I'm buying batteries or something that's kind of a commodity like trash bags, and I have an opportunity to save some money by buying an Amazon brand, the one I always use is Amazon Basics. I've really never been disappointed by something that Amazon has decided to make and offer at a better price than other people are offering it. So that they would put an offering of one of their products in a place that's handy for me to see before I buy something, I don't find this at all aggressive or anything that I as a customer would be upset about. And so I'm just sort of shaking my head as I read the story. I was interested that there are now 244 comments on this story, and most of them, I think, have a similar attitude. One person named Alcar writes, "How's this any different than those end cap displays in grocery stores? It's just marketing. If you haven't learned how to ignore it by now, it's too late. Have you noticed how many items are returned as features and how many fewer items are returned under other rankings? They used to display the same number, not anymore." Somebody else says that might push the antitrust button. Well, a lot of these stories have echoes of things you hear in the campaign. People who I otherwise consider reasonable, like Pete Buttigieg, are saying Amazon didn't pay $1 of taxes, and if you paid more than $1 in taxes, you paid more than Amazon did, and they made billions of dollars. There's never nobody on the campaign trail is pointing out that the reason Amazon didn't pay taxes is because Congress and other entities that are in charge of taxes had tax incentives in place for companies that create thousands of jobs, and the value to society of creating a job or thousands of jobs, as Amazon does, was deemed worth giving up some tax revenue for. If that's no longer a good calculation, then that's something Congress could look. But in any event, a story like this has echoes in kind of a general level of Amazon's too big, Amazon's creepy. We've talked about that on that podcast. Crazy Janie writes, if a consumer is so wishy-washy about their purchase that they'll be influenced by a pop-up box, well, they are creating their own problem. I am no fan of Amazon, and as such do not have an Amazon Prime account, but the blame for this falls squarely on the guy-gal clicking on the box to complete the sale. Another person, Candace, says of the story, and that's an issue because, 4 question marks. I would say a quick scan of these comments, it seems like by far the majority of them come from the same point of view that I have as a customer, saying, I don't consider it a problem when Amazon makes a product and uses pretty vigorous quality control on it and offers it at a good price and then makes it easy for me to see it. I'd be curious what you think about this. And, sometimes when I read these stories, I think, well, I've got a podcast about Amazon on the Kindle. I should be defending the company. I should be weighing in here. that doesn't interest me. At this point, I feel like Jay Carney and the people who are in charge of Amazon's reputation and working on the lobbying and all the rest of it, there are plenty of people making good money that their job is to protect Amazon in this kind of battle of ideas that is getting somewhat triggered by the political season and just by newspaper reporters. I think Jeff Bezos maybe actually pays sort of a penalty for owning the newspaper, because if you're an ambitious reporter and you're working at the Washington Post and somebody has an idea for a story about Amazon, you're probably going to bend over backward to prove that, boy, there's not going to be any coddling of this company just because the guy who is a major shareholder of the company happens to own the newspaper. Next week, I'm going to have a chance to talk with a guest who is in a good position to assess what is Amazon's reputation like now compared with 6 years ago, when he wrote sort of the definitive portrait of Amazon, the everything store. This is Brad Stone, who now works at Bloomberg, and he's going to be my guest next week for our conversation. And he's working on an update of that book, and in the book, he addressed the issue of antitrust and was talking about the kinds of strategies that Amazon appeared to be undertaking at that point of being seen as an innovator and having some protection in its basic strategy as a company to efforts that might get going for antitrust or other moves against the company. We're pretty much at that period now that was anticipated back when Brad's book first came out, and I'll be intrigued to hear how he thinks that battle for Amazon's reputation within the company and the society is going as he prepares for this update to his book. Got a couple of tech tips to pass along to you. One is the new way to get to your annotations and highlights that you make in your Kindle books online. It used to be kindle.amazon.com is where you would go to find these, and it was pretty handy. Over the years, it got easier and easier to find the annotations there, and now it's a pretty nice display. It shows an image of the cover of the book that you read most recently, and then you can find what you captured on your Kindle, and you can edit it, you can print it out, and I use it a lot when I'm preparing for interviews. That was a pretty easy URL to remember, and I actually did kind of remember kindle.amazon.com. The one they have now I don't think is as easy to remember, but it's worth trying to remember it. It's read.amazon.com/notebook. And if you go to kindle.amazon.com, you will be directed to the new one, read.amazon.com/notebook. But that's the preferred way to get to it. And if you want to get to it fast, then that's the place to go. The next thing I want to mention in tech tips, I got a very useful email from Tom Semple a while back. I had been talking about changes that are coming in the iOS operating system for iPhones and iPads, and there was something in there about how you could connect to the iPhone with the new iOS, which is going to be released sometime this fall, and there were going to be some advantages for Kindle material. I think I didn't quite catch the drift of that, so Tom pointed out to me, hi Len, the point of being able to use an iOS device to be able to put books on your Kindle is not necessarily because Kindle lacks an internet connection. You could, of course, set up a hotspot on your phone and share that with the Kindle to get books from Kindle Store. But because some operations could not previously be done with an iOS device, and which you'd be doing by wired connection to a PC or Mac. For example, Kindles have had problems downloading books directly from Gutenberg.org and cannot directly connect to most cloud services with its very limited web browser, the limited web browser on the Kindle. But with iOS 13, an iPhone or iPad can be used instead, or someone might carry around a thumb drive with books on it. Now they can copy them to iOS internal storage, then connect the Kindle and copy them to the Kindle. Kindle owners who are impatient and want to get the latest software update for their Kindle will also be able to download the update file and transfer it to the Kindle with an iOS device. There are a few other aspects of iOS 13, the one that's coming in the fall that Tom mentions. Custom fonts can be installed, managed, and purchased from the App Store and used by apps that look for these. There are going to be improved Siri voices in it. This is for the speak screen in addition to Siri. The speak screen speech controller can be configured to display at all times for quicker access. Previously required a 2-finger swipe from the top of the screen each time you wanted to use it. Tom uses this as a TTS substitute in the Kindle app. Voice control. This is pretty cool. You will be able to turn pages and navigate apps like Kindle entirely with voice commands. And this will also be on the Mac OS Catalina, which is the update coming to the Macintosh. There's a lot of customization possible where an app may fall short of having good support for accessibility, including custom gestures and Siri shortcuts. This fills a gap for people with adequate vision but who have difficulty physically interacting with a touch screen, as well as for average people who need or want a hands-free reading experience. Tom suggests if you're knitting while you're reading, you're going to be able to just turn the pages with your voice. So that makes me interested in seeing iOS 13 coming this fall. There'll be some aspects of it which are going to improve the Kindle interface. Time now for the interview. I used to enjoy breakfast with Bryan Person at a French cafe in Austin when he worked for Lithium, and I would turn up each spring for South by Southwest. Lithium and another software company, Spreadfast, merged to create a new company named Khoros, and Bryan and his family were posted by Khoros to London. Bryan and I have shared tech passions ever since meeting at Steve Garfield's Boston Media Makers Breakfast more than a decade ago. At one point, he interviewed me before and after the first iPad was released in 2010 to record my expectations and first impressions on how it would affect use of the Kindle. Bryan created a popular event in Boston called Social Media Breakfast, which he carried with him when he moved to Austin. So breakfast is something I associate with my friend Bryan, and I hope one day to have a tea and crumpets with him and his wife Stella and son Amani in London. Meanwhile, we connected by Skype this week on Monday, August 26th, to look back on reading technology and other topics that I hope will be of interest to you. I began by asking Bryan to tell us how his family ended up moving from Austin to London almost a year ago.
My wife, Stella, my son, Amani, and me, we moved to London almost a year ago now, our first week of September of 2018. I work for a company called Khoros, which is headquartered in Austin, and it's a software company. And we have an office of about 75 folks here in London. And so there was an opportunity to bring kind of my expertise in a certain area of the product that wasn't as prolific here in London and in Europe. So I came over for we're kind of looking at it as a 2 to 3 year stint, we think. And so I just kind of came over and continued a similar role, but just based out of our London office. So it's been about a year, and it's going well.
What's been the most challenging part of the cultural transition for you and Stella and Amani?
So, sometimes you think same language, right? How different can it be? But I think just as a family, the rhythms are a little bit different, right? And so the school system, some definite differences there, and Amani's kind of middle school age, so it's called secondary school here. And so that was just quite a different system, so just adjusting to that. And Stella is a nurse by training. She stopped working for now while she gets her nursing credentials. It takes quite a while to get those transferred from one country to another, right? So she's not been working, although knowing your appreciation for digital products, she spends a lot of time drawing on her iPad.
Oh,
so she's actually growing and flourishing as an artist, which is amazing to see. And so she's been doing a lot of drawing with digital apps and the pencil right on the iPad. So it's just some changes in the family rhythm. And that just takes time to kind of find your way in a new place.
Well, I was catching up with a conversation we had just about 9 years ago, 2010, and it was just before and just after the iPad was released. I had forgotten. I didn't have to line up as early to be first in line to get an iPad in Denver as I had getting the first iPhone in Cambridge. But it was still. I tend to think of that as back in my youth when I used to do these crazy things. But it as I listened to it, what you and I were talking about is how is reading books going to change with this iPad? Are we all going to get rid of our Kindles and switch to the iPad? And it was intriguing to hear how little we knew what the experience of reading a book or anything else on an iPad was going to be. And now when I look at my arsenal of tools that I use for reading wherever I am, it's not an iPad. It's a Fire HD 8. It's a Kindle Oasis. It's my iPhone Max, which has got a nice big screen for reading. And then I'm using this remarkable tablet more for taking notes than for reading. I think you had a Kindle before the iPhone came out, but how has it changed since then in terms of what you're reading on what device?
Yeah, it's interesting, Len. I also don't read very much on the iPad. In fact, Stella uses it much more than I do. But I have this Kindle, and I should know the model. It was the one you advised me. To get. I had a Paperwhite. I left it on a plane, so I had to get a new one. And this is, I think,
it's probably a Paperwhite, isn't it? There's no. I think
it's it's the
new
right.
version.
It's the new, maybe the one from last year.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was looking at the books I've read in 2019, and it's about 50-50. Well, I've read 8 books on the Kindle this year and 7 books in either paper or hardback. So it's divided, right? And I think it depends on A, the type of book I'm reading, and B, kind of how I'm wanting to interact with that book. So to give you an example, I know you've read Austin Kleon's latest book this year, and I think you mentioned that you had ordered the print version of the book.
It's always with me.
Keep going.
Keep going.
And I did the same, right? And I think just I've not found the visual components on the Kindle. I find that quite kind of frustrating to interact with. So when there's illustrations or really good drawings, they don't quite come through in this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ordered the paperback version of Austin's book. So that's one reason, right? There's another book I read with some just amazing illustrations. It's around I like basketball, and it's about the growth and analytics of the game, right? But there's a lot of really detailed, nuanced illustrations in that book, and again, those just don't come through in the Kindle. So I wanted the paper version of that to hold it in my hands and really see the richness of those illustrations. And also, I guess paper copies allow me to write in the margins, right, and to mark it up and draw arrows. And so again, depending on the type of book, I really like to do that. I find the Kindle good for highlighting, not as good for the note taking. So even though I think that functionality has improved over the years, the typing, right, the keypad on the Kindle doesn't work great for me. So again, depending on what I want to do and the type of book, that determines whether I go print version or read it on the Kindle.
Well, now, so you don't have a tablet, a Fire tablet. Stella's using the iPad. Was there a time when you were reading books on the tablet, and that you sort of came back home to the Kindle?
So I know I've read a bit on the iPad over the years, but it was actually the Kindle app on the iPad. Right. So probably similar to the way I'm doing now, books where I wanted to do highlighting. I actually found, the iPad we have now is one of the larger ones, and that's a little too heavy for me to just be sitting back and reading, right? So when Stella is illustrating, she has it down on the table, right? So she doesn't have to hold it up. Actually, I have it here with all the devices here.
Is that
so
the
this
iPad
is
Pro?
This is the iPad Pro, yes. And nice. So that's, it's a good size. but for holding it and reading, it's too heavy.
Yeah.
So I love how lightweight the Kindle is. So just over the years, that's what allowed me to, I think, move away from the iPad for actual reading to something lighter weight.
How about, do you end up reading on your phone when you're at the Department of Motor Vehicles, the famous place of waiting?
Sometimes, although I think if I'm really trying to settle into a book and say this is kind of my reading time, I don't do that as well on the phone. I tend to read news articles, things like that on the phone that's shorter, right? But when I'm digging into a good book, I don't want to do that on the phone.
Yeah, exactly. How about Audible books? Say, if you look at the books you've read so far this year, how many of them have you listened to?
So just one. In fact, I hadn't done Audible for the longest time. In fact, because I listened to so many podcasts.
Well,
and so I was trying to think, where am I going to fit audiobooks into my, just the way I consume content, right? And I listen to probably 10 hours a week of podcasts. Like, it's a lot on my commute, walking around the neighborhood, sometimes as I do things like folding laundry, right? Like, I listen to podcasts, and that's a lot of content. And I thought, Audible sounds interesting, but then is it going to knock out some of the podcasts that I listen to? But I'm trying it. I'm doing a trial membership for 30 days of Audible, and I'm going through the biography of Frederick Douglass. Came out, I think, earlier this year, called The Prophet of Freedom. And it's quite good, right? It's also 35 hours of audio content. And so, like a lot of history books, and I know you've read the Hamilton book and the Grant book. They're 700, 800, 900, 1,000 pages. And so it's a lot, right? And so I actually don't think I'm going to get through the full Audible book in the 30 days. So the decision I need to make is, again, is it worth continuing with this? I mean, the content is great, but am I going to make full use of that membership given how much I consume through the podcast that I listen to?
So it sounds like you didn't buy the Kindle version of the book as well. So you could switch to the reading it if you want to drop the Audible membership.
So actually, I didn't mention that, but I did. So I do have it on my Kindle. This gets to, there was an interview you did last year, which is stuck in my head, with Simon. He's a Power Reader. Simon Eskioldsen, maybe?
Yes,
is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that book, he talked about some interesting ways that he kind of takes notes on what he's read, right? And this is something that I've aspired to do better. And I think, there was a book I read, and I said, right, I'm gonna take the notes of everything I highlighted and put it in a separate file. And I think I got through the first chapter, and then I got distracted by the next book I wanted to read. So that's always the challenge. It's like, if I take all those notes and write them down and organize it, that means I'm not reading the next book that's on my list. So I think a lot of this is experimenting, right? So I thought, if I listen to Douglass on Audible, and then depending on where I am, I can pick it up and read the next chapter on the Kindle, and then I can go back to Audible. And the Kindle allows me to highlight. Audible doesn't allow me to highlight. So I don't know. This is a lot of experimentation in finding kind of what works for me based on, again, the type of content. It could be the mood I'm in. It could be my where I am at the time and which device or mode of consumption makes the most sense.
There's something that Audible is, I think, said it's going to do. It hasn't done yet. It's this captions thing where if you have an Audible book, it sounds like on your phone you would be able to see just the passage you're listening to appear as text, and some publishers are suing them for copyright infringement. And I thought that was an interesting move for Audible to make. I've enjoyed that immersive reading feature on my Fire HD tablet, because like when I was working out in Denver on a cross trainer, I could be listening to the book and then I could see the passages being highlighted as they're being read. What do you think about that as sort of a hybrid of listening and reading at the same time?
In fact, I was just checking to see if the Douglas book on Audible has that. It doesn't, that I can see. Mm-hmm. But I think that would be helpful because, well, another thing that I do, Len, is I tend to listen on faster than 1x speed, right? Depending
even the
on,
Kindle Chronicles?
Even the Kindle Chronicles. In fact, no. you have a nice, easy way of speaking, but that also means I can listen a little bit faster, right? Because you get through more content.
You're losing the mellifluous quality of my voice at 1x.
Yeah, I think it's 1.4 or 1.5 that I listen to you. There's others. I can't go too much faster than that. But I'm listening to Douglas on 1.25, and again, the way the speaker enunciates and reads is really nice. It's fine on that speed, but there's the occasional sentence where I'm like, ooh, what exactly did he say? Or I don't know, I zone out for a minute and I missed it, and so I have to go back and listen again. But I was thinking, if it actually had the words, then I could be doubly sure of what he's saying, right? So. I would like that. I think that, and I know we're planning to talk about Blinkist app, but the Blinkist app had both that I was experimenting with did have both the audio, the audio and the written text of what the speaker was reading, right? But those are summaries as opposed to the actual original author's words, right? So I think maybe that's how they got around the copyright standard. Yeah.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that. I think I subscribed to Blinkist. You and I had talked a few weeks ago about it, and I had a pretty negative view of it just because I grew up thinking Reader's Digest condensed books were a sign of a lower than average intellect, and Blinkist is like, Reader's Digest condensed books on steroids. But I was pretty impressed with the quality of the writing, and it really did give you that ability to catch the drift of a book, especially a nonfiction book, in a pretty manageable chunks. But what was your experience?
Yeah, I think and upfront, I didn't continue with the subscription. I think part of the challenge, Len, is I'm consuming so much content, and I was thinking I don't know that I'm going to have time to keep up with this. In addition to trying to fully read books and consume a lot of podcasts, and I'm trying Audible, right? So that was part of it. I like the focus on nonfiction. I primarily read nonfiction. I don't never read fiction, but it's primarily nonfiction. So that was attractive to me. I think some were better than others, right? And part of that is also who's doing the reading, right? And their delivery is so important. And I listened to some, and they sounded a little too robotic for me, right? And so that was a bit of a turnoff, and not all of them. And so I found some of the summaries pretty good, and then I found some, because they were condensed in the way that they were, I thought, wow, it's taking this magnificent work of writing and just just cutting out so much. And I get you need to do that to get it into a compact format. But I said, I don't know that for these works, if I'm going to read them, I don't know that I want the compact format. Yeah. Now it means I'm not going to get through as many books, but that's okay. Right. Yeah. I think I listened to maybe 10 or so over the course of the week, and they started to almost sound the same to me, which concerned me. And I thought, well, they obviously have a clear format that they write these in, right? But it almost felt a little too formulaic, and I thought I don't think I'm quite enjoying the author's content as I would as if I were to read the book. So taking all those factors together, I thought intriguing concept. I think it will work well for some people, but just for me and the way that I read and consume content at this point in my life, I'm gonna take a pass. So
as we're talking, I'm realizing I can't even remember the titles of the Blinkist summaries that I read in the past month, never mind any of the points that were made. And it seems to me that if I read a full book, I'm thinking of that book, Thinking Slow, Thinking Fast by Kamen and other books that I've read. Just the fact that I spent all those hours, and for me it takes a long time to read a book. I mean, because I'm doing other stuff and I'm reading several books. But it's almost as if my brain holds on to some of the ideas in a book like that just out of stubbornness because I spent so much time on it. It would be such a waste to just let it flow through. Whereas, Blinkist or some of the things I read on the web, it's almost like, junk food snacks. They're sort of pleasurable as I'm taking them in, but they don't seem to lodge much in long-term or even medium-term memory.
Yeah, so one of the things I did during the week I was testing it out is I picked a book that I had recently read on the Kindle called Range by David Epstein. Really enjoyed the book. And then I said, let me listen to the summary and on Blinkist. And the summary wasn't bad, right? It was written pretty well. I thought it encapsulated some of the key ideas, but I thought the enjoyment I had out of spending a few weeks to read that book, as you're talking about, right? I think allowed me to retain those ideas, exactly what you're saying, because I had spent time and hearing him make the argument in chapter 1 and then again in chapter 4 and then right all the way through the book it's lodged deeper in my memory than if I had listened to it in 15 minutes and then immediately got on to the next one. Right. And so just the fact that we spend so much time as reading through the full book that we can just sit with these ideas for longer allows us to retain it better. So I'm 100% in agreement with you on that point. It's definitely true.
It's like we let them marinate a little more that way. Mm-hmm. You and I are both fans of Austin's book, Keep Going. There was a chapter, the way I'm using it is when I'm a pretty frequent morning journaler, and I'll read a few pages of Austin's book, and it'll put something in my mind that I end up writing about in my journal, just say, gee, here's a quote from Austin, what do I think about it? And there was one the other day, it's the one, Demons Hate Fresh Air, and it's just all about going on walks and getting off the internet and having a part of the life that is balances the online life. And I know that, you've got a family and you've got outside interests and you've got a religious faith. You've always been active in a church wherever you've lived. Have you come up on any ways to frame what you get of benefit online versus a picnic in the park versus your work versus your family? It seems to me that everybody I talk to, and certainly my own experience, everybody's struggling with these boundaries. And any attempt to make I used to have a thing where I'd say no net till noon. I'm just going to stay off all this stuff till noon. That didn't seem like it would be that hard, but I hardly ever can even make that kind of a simple change in my consumption of everything that's coming through the screens. But I wonder if you have any tips on a balanced life.
I don't know, other than I think I'm commiserating with you because, one of the things that, and I don't remember if Austin says this in the book or he said it in the podcast he did with you, is I think his walks he's with his wife and with his kids and they take a route and there's some routine in that, right? They take this, route every day. And I think he doesn't have his earbuds in his ears when he takes that walk. And I do lots of walking, both commuting to and from the train. We don't have a car here in London, so that's been great because it forces me to walk more. And I mentioned the park earlier, so I walk down and around the park. The problem is I have these in my ears most of the time when I'm doing the walking, right? So the benefits of what Austin is talking about, which is that, this active movement, right, almost gets your brain working in a certain way, but I'm negating some of that by continuing to listen to the next podcast or book that I'm reading, right? So I think I'm getting part of it right. Now, there'll be occasional times where I'm like, I need to take the earbuds out and just walk and be observant. And sometimes I pray, like maybe I'll pray on my walk to the train station, which is 10 or 15 minutes. But I would say that is 10% of the time I'm walking, right? So I probably need to get that 10% up to 50% or 80% to get some of the benefits that Austin's talking about. I think I'm just as guilty as you or anyone else, right? It's like, ooh, there's this great piece of content, or there's been this, I want to find out what happens in this next chapter, or Len's new podcast is out. So I really want to listen to that for my walk today. Instead of just kind of leaving it and getting the other benefits that come from walking when you're not also consuming audio. So, I guess I would say Austin is right. Austin is right. And I just need to, actually do that a little bit more often.
Keep being reminded. Now, how old is Amani now?
So Amani is nearly 13. So he would be a 7th grader if he were in the U.S.
What is his balance among these different, the real world without earbuds, screens, books? What's his profile look like of consuming content compared with yours?
Probably pretty similar in the sense that he does consume a lot of electronic content, and I think sometimes I say you need to get off electronics, and he will, but I don't always set the best example, right? And I'm like, no, but it doesn't count because I'm reading a book. So mine's more wholesome, I guess. He does read. He doesn't read, I would say, as often, and he usually needs to be nudged into doing the reading. But then once he gets into a good book, he could. I have seen him sit for an hour or two in one go and just read something if he's really into the book, right? Yeah. Other days he'll say, Dad, you asked me to read for 20 minutes. So I set my alarm, my timer, it's 20 minutes. I'm done. I'm going back to my game. I think, there's certain ways I think his balance could be a little bit better in some ways, but I've just said the same about myself, right? So I like that the books that he likes to read so he's kind of middle school age, and I would say the books that he enjoys tend to be books aimed at his age group and kind of like middle school age kids engaged in some type of misadventure of some sort, like at a summer camp, or just, what happens in the school during the course of the year. And I'll tell you, one of the things I really love is when he is in the middle of a good book. And he just starts cracking up, right? Just kind of uncontrolled laughter and just, spontaneous laughter as he's reading because he finds something so funny. And I confess that doesn't happen to me very much. On occasion, there's a couple of writers that send me into fits of laughter. But I love when I hear that, right? Because that means he's totally engaged what he's reading, and he just finds the book so funny that it has him rolling around in laughter. So that's always a joy to hear.
My grandson James is 13, so a little bit younger than Amani, and he was putting a lot of pressure on his mother, Sarah, my daughter, to go to this hot summer 2019 rap concert near Portland, and there were some kind of big names in rap, Wiz Khalifa, A Boogie, all people I'd never heard of. So I had the idea that I would chaperone him to this rap concert. If I found out there was no age limit, and I called the station, they said, "Yeah, you don't have to be in the mosh pit. You can be out in the grass. Your grandson will be safe." And so I started listening to all these artists that are going to be collected here on August 31st. Turns out he can't go. He's got a chance to go to the U.S. Tennis Open in New York that weekend. So he said, "Grandpa, we'll do this next year." But I'm fascinated. I mean, this is a kid that has grown up in Cambridge, white kid, privileged. He's just drawn to this music in a way that he knows the lyrics, he knows the people, he knows the stories. He listens all the time. And when I listen to the lyrics, some of them are, quite troubling. It's not just a strong language. It's, the violence and the misogyny. It's not all that way. I think friends of mine that just dismiss this stuff are missing the boat. There's some love stories, and there's all kinds of stuff that comes out of this world. But what are you seeing any kind of a similar pull on Amani from music that troubles you, or do you what do you see in the music that he's passionate about?
Yeah, I think maybe less so in the music, but more in some of the movies that he wants to watch, right? And so he says, hey, this is, a rated R movie, but hey, my friends can watch rated R movies, right? And so then we have to go through that discussion about why we've made the choices we've made as parents, right? Music, not so much. He actually listens to rap, but it tends to be Christian rap, right? And so the lyrics are, less troubling, I would say, right? But hey, he's at an age where he's gonna try out some different things in terms of the music he likes to listen to. So I think the best we can do as parents is just to be aware of what it is he's listening to. And I love what you were offering. Like, hey, let me go and be a part of this with you, right? So you're not kind of always just scolding, right? So let me experience this with you and see what it's like, right? And I think as parents, I think it's important that we do that, right? And so instead of just saying no for the sake of, there are boundaries like we talked about with movies, but even there we'll say, okay, if you really want to see this one and we think it's probably not the appropriate rating, like make the case, right? And sometimes he'll be able to do that. And he'll say, look, I looked it up and it seems like it's about this. And, I think that's okay. We're watching something on the plane, and he asked me in advance if he could watch it because it was, I think PG-13, and those are, we're kind of 50-50 on those. And he said, is it okay? And he started watching it. And I said, if you see something that you think isn't appropriate, like you need to, and I was right next to him on the plane. I said, you need to stop it. And to his credit, he did. Huh. Right. So there was, something around, sexual content, I think, that he knew he shouldn't be seeing, and so he stopped it, right? Don't know that that's always the case when I'm not right next to him, but we have that conversation, right? And I think that's kind of the best that we can do, right? Because you can't always have your eye on every piece of content that your kid consumes. So it's just hopefully having that open dialogue around what we think it's appropriate, and if something's inappropriate, here's why we think it could be harmful to him, and that's why we kind of that's why we have the guidelines and make the decisions that we make. Right. And so, I realize the older that he gets, that gets a little more challenging. But for now, so far we've been in a good place and had good discussions around that.
Would you sometimes, if he makes a case to see a movie that is questionable or raises concerns, would you then go and see the movie with him?
Sometimes. Yeah. And I think my wife did that with a movie, can't remember which one recently, where she went along and sat with him. So, that's one way to do that. Yeah.
Let's finish up. What do you miss most about Austin?
Oh, that's a great question. It is not the 100-degree days in the summer, that's for sure. I was back for a visit recently for a week, and every day was 100 plus. And the traffic, I did miss that. I think it's the family and friends, right? It's the personal connections. We lived there for 10 years, and we think we'll go back after this stint in London. So it feels like, it doesn't feel like we're gone forever. It feels like we're away for a while and then we'll come back. But it is it's the really good friends. It's we have family there. It's the church that we were part of. And so, I think that's the tricky part, but I've been able to go back a couple of times over the last year. So been able to kind of keep those relationships strong, even while living over here. Obviously digital tools make it easier in doing what we're doing here, Len. Family in Boston as well, but just being able to look at each other on camera and talk is a good way to, it's not the same as being, having that coffee right across from you, but it's good, right? It's a good way to feel like you're staying connected to the people that matter to you most.
I'm glad I've been able to stay connected with Bryan Person and that he was available for this week's conversation. After we turned off the Skype recorder app, we visited for a little while longer. He had something interesting to add. He said his mother, Janet, worked for 20 years in the Barnes & Noble Children's Department in Saugus, Massachusetts, before retiring with lifetime rights to the substantial employee discount on books. And she has set a good example for her family by often giving books as presents, as did my own mother. That was a favorite gift of hers, and she'd always write something in the book, so they have now become treasures. That's it for this week, and next week, as I said, Brad Stone will be joining us. He's a pretty busy guy, so if something comes up, if he has to interview the Secretary of Treasury or something, he might have to bump us, but I do think we're on a schedule, and I look forward to talking to him on Wednesday, I believe, for next week's show. Outro music. My family has varying degrees of musical talent, but there was a lot of energy and enthusiasm for a song that was sung to me after the lobster rolls tonight at the next cottage, and I'll close with that as a way to remember a pretty spectacular day here at Ocean Park.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Grandpa. Happy birthday to you.
In Maine!
What did he say?
In Maine!
In Maine!
Because we all said it was in Maine.
How old is Grandpa?
9. 8. 60?
60 what?
189 years old.
69, that's it. This is the best birthday ever. Thank you, everybody.